My father handed out gifts to everyone at his 75th birthday party. My brother Jake, my sister Maya, even my teenage cousins. But when he got to me, he just walked past like I was invisible. I'm Riley, and I've been dealing with my dad's rejection my entire life. But this moment was different because my 12-year-old son Tyler was watching. I felt that familiar sting of humiliation wash over me, the same feeling I'd carried since childhood, when suddenly, Tyler stood up from his chair at the kids' table. He walked over to my father with this small, wrapped box in his hands, and his voice was so calm and determined when he said, "Grandpa, my dad told me to give this to you if you ever made my mom feel bad again. He said you'd understand what it means." The entire room went silent. My father, Frank, this tough retired engineer who never shows emotion, took that box with trembling hands. When he opened it and saw what was inside, tears started falling down his cheeks for the first time I'd seen since I was a little girl. What my ex-husband Nate had put in that box changed everything between my father and me in a single moment. And I'm going to tell you exactly what happened and why it matters so much. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home that Saturday afternoon and immediately felt my stomach twist into that familiar knot. The same white colonial house with blue shutters looked exactly as it had 20 years ago, but somehow it always made me feel small again. My son Tyler was in the passenger seat, excited about seeing his grandparents, completely unaware of the emotional minefield we were walking into. I envied his innocence. "Mom, why do you look nervous?" Tyler asked as we sat in the car for a moment. I forced a smile and told him I was just thinking. But the truth was, I was preparing myself for another round of feeling like I didn't measure up. At 42 years old, I still turned into that insecure little girl whenever I came home. My mother, Beth, had gone all out for Dad's 75th birthday. The house was decorated with gold streamers and balloons, and I could smell her famous pot roast through the front door. She greeted us with her usual warm hug, but I caught that look in her eyes, the one that said she hoped today would go smoothly. We both knew better than to expect it, but we kept hoping anyway. The living room was already full of family. My brother Jake was holding court near the fireplace, telling some story about his latest court case victory to our cousins. He looked every inch the successful lawyer in his perfectly pressed shirt and expensive watch. Jake had always been everything our father wanted in a son, and he wore that approval like a badge of honor. When he saw me, he gave me a quick nod and continued his story without missing a beat. My sister Maya was helping Mom in the kitchen, looking radiant as always. She'd just opened her own photography studio, and everyone was buzzing about her success. Maya had inherited Dad's artistic eye and Mom's people skills, making her the perfect middle child who somehow managed to stay in everyone's good graces. She hugged me tight when I walked in and whispered, "Glad you're here." But even her warmth couldn't shake the feeling that I was the odd one out. Dad was sitting in his favorite recliner, surveying his kingdom like the patriarch he'd always been. Frank Brooks had spent 40 years as an engineer, building bridges and solving problems with mathematical precision. He approached relationships the same way, with clear formulas for success and failure. Unfortunately, I'd never quite fit his equation. When our eyes met across the room, he gave me a brief nod, the same acknowledgement he might give a neighbor he barely knew. The worst part was how obvious the dynamic was to everyone else. My cousins, my aunts and uncles, even the family friends who'd joined us, they all knew I was the disappointment. Not the successful lawyer like Jake, not the talented artist like Maya, just Riley, who worked in marketing and had gotten divorced last year. I could feel their careful politeness, the way conversations shifted when I joined them, as if they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Tyler, bless his heart, had no idea about any of this family politics. He ran straight to his grandfather and started chattering about his baseball season, completely comfortable in a way I envied. Dad's face actually softened when he talked to Tyler, and for a moment I remembered that he was capable of warmth. It just seemed reserved for everyone except me. My divorce from Nate had been finalized 6 months ago, and while it was amicable, I knew Dad saw it as another failure on my part. He'd liked Nate well enough, but the fact that I couldn't make my marriage work just confirmed his belief that I lacked staying power. Never mind that Nate and I had simply grown apart, or that we were better as co-parents than spouses. In Dad's world, divorce meant someone had quit, and quitters didn't deserve respect. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, helping Mom with last-minute preparations and trying to stay useful. It was easier than standing around making small talk with relatives who looked at me with pity or polite disinterest. Tyler was having a blast playing with his younger cousins, and I was grateful he couldn't see how isolated I felt in my own family. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was successful in my own right. I'd built a solid career in marketing, owned my own home, and was raising a wonderful son. But none of that seemed to matter when I walked through these doors. Here, I was still the daughter who'd chosen English over engineering, who'd married for love instead of stability, who'd prioritized happiness over achievement. In Frank Brooks' world, those were character flaws, not life choices. As we gathered around the dining room table for dinner, I took my usual seat between Tyler and Maya, trying to shake off the melancholy that always settled over me during these family gatherings. I had no idea that everything was about to change. After dinner, Mom brought out Dad's birthday cake, and we all sang while he blew out the candles with Tyler's help. The moment felt warm and normal, and I let myself relax for the first time all day. Maybe this birthday would be different. Maybe we could just have a nice family celebration without any drama. Then Dad stood up and cleared his throat, and I felt my stomach drop. I knew that look. He was about to make one of his speeches, the kind where he handed out judgment along with his wisdom. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd perfected over decades of being the family patriarch. 75 years is a milestone, and it's made me think about legacy, about what really matters. He paused, looking around the room with satisfaction. "I've worked hard my whole life to build something meaningful, and I believe in investing in the future, in rewarding the people who make me proud." My heart started beating faster. I could sense where this was going, and it wasn't anywhere good. Dad walked over to the sideboard where Mom had arranged a collection of wrapped gifts. "Jake," he said, turning to my brother with a smile I rarely saw directed at me, "you've built an incredible legal practice. You're everything I hoped you'd become." He handed Jake a thick envelope. "This is a transfer of some of my stock portfolio. Consider it an investment in your continued success." Jake opened the envelope and his eyes widened. "Dad, this is too much," he said, but he was grinning as he showed his wife the documents. The room erupted in congratulations and applause. "Maya," Dad continued, moving to my sister, "your photography studio is exactly the kind of creative business venture I can get behind. You're turning your talent into something sustainable." He handed her another envelope. "This should help with your expansion plans." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she hugged him. "Thank you, Daddy. This means everything." More applause, more congratulations. I sat there smiling and clapping, playing my part while my chest grew tighter with each passing moment. Dad then moved to my teenage cousins, handing them envelopes containing contributions to their college funds. He praised their grades, their ambitions, their bright futures. Each gift came with a speech about potential and promise. The room was buzzing with excitement and gratitude. And then he turned toward me. I straightened in my chair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. This was it. Maybe he'd finally acknowledged something I'd accomplished. Maybe he'd recognized that I was a good mother, or that I'd handled my divorce with dignity, or that I'd been working 60-hour weeks to make sure Tyler and I stayed afloat. Dad looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he simply walked past me to the next person, handing my Aunt Carol a small gift for helping with the party planning. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt every pair of eyes on me, felt the weight of their pity and embarrassment. My face burned with humiliation, but I kept that smile plastered on my face because that's what you do. You pretend it doesn't hurt. You pretend you're not sitting there wondering what's so fundamentally wrong with you that your own father can't find a single thing worth celebrating. Tyler looked confused, glancing between his grandfather and me. I could see the question forming in his 12-year-old mind, trying to understand why everyone else got gifts, but his mom didn't. Jake, probably trying to lighten the mood but making it infinitely worse, let out an uncomfortable laugh. "Well, we all know Dad's philosophy," he said, raising his glass. "He only gives to his legacy, not his regrets." The words hit me like a physical blow. Regrets. That's what I was to my father. Not a daughter who'd struggled and survived and built a life for herself and her son. Not a person worthy of love or respect. A regret. A few people laughed nervously, but most just looked down at their plates or suddenly found their drinks very interesting. The room felt like it was closing in on me. I wanted to run, to grab Tyler and leave, to never subject myself to this humiliation again. Mom sat frozen in her chair, looking down at her hands folded in her lap. She'd witnessed this kind of treatment toward me for years, and as always, she said nothing. She never defended me, never spoke up, never challenged Dad's cruelty. Her silence was almost as crushing as his rejection. Tyler was staring at me now, his eyes wide with understanding. He was old enough to know what had just happened, old enough to see how much it hurt me. I felt ashamed that he had to witness this, that he had to see his mother reduced to nothing by her own father. I was gathering the courage to make some excuse about needing to leave early when Tyler suddenly stood up. The moment Tyler stood up, the entire room shifted. My 12-year-old son, who should have been focused on cake and playing with his cousins, was instead witnessing his mother's public humiliation. I felt a wave of protective panic wash over me. This was exactly what I'd been trying to shield him from his entire life, the reason I'd been hesitant to bring him to family gatherings in the first place. "Tyler, honey, sit down," I whispered, reaching for his arm. But he stepped away from me with a determination I'd never seen before. His jaw was set in a way that reminded me of Nate when he was making an important decision. There was something almost adult in his posture as he looked directly at his grandfather. "I have something for you, Grandpa," Tyler said, his voice clear and steady. The room went completely silent. Even the little kids stopped their chatter. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box, about the size that might hold a piece of jewelry. My heart started racing. I had no idea what this was. Tyler hadn't mentioned bringing a gift for his grandfather, and we'd already given Dad his present earlier, a book about engineering marvels that he'd acknowledged with a polite thank you before setting it aside. "Tyler, what are you doing?" I asked quietly. But he was already walking toward Dad with purpose. Jake was watching with curious amusement, probably thinking this was some sweet gesture from his nephew. Maya had stopped clearing dishes and was staring. Mom looked nervous, like she sensed this wasn't going to be a typical grandchild moment. "My dad wanted me to give this to you," Tyler said, holding out the box to his grandfather. "He said to give it to you if you ever made my mom feel bad again. He said you'd understand what it means." The words hung in the air like a challenge. I felt my face go hot with embarrassment and something else, something that might have been pride. Nate had prepared Tyler for this moment. My ex-husband, who'd watched me come home hurt from family gatherings for years, who'd held me while I cried after particularly brutal visits, had somehow anticipated this exact scenario. Dad took the box with hands that were suddenly not quite steady. He looked at Tyler with confusion, then at me with something I couldn't read. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. "What did your father tell you about this?" Dad asked Tyler, his voice softer than it had been all evening. Tyler looked back at me for just a moment, and I saw something in his eyes that made my chest tight. It was protectiveness. My little boy was protecting me in a way that no one else in this room ever had. "He said Mom has been sad about you for a really long time," Tyler said simply. "He said she always tries to hide it, but he could tell. He said maybe you forgot something important, and this might help you remember." I felt tears threatening and fought them back. How had Nate known this would happen? How long had he been planning for this moment? Even after our divorce, even after we decided we were better apart than together, he was still looking out for me. The thought was overwhelming. Dad was staring at the box like it might explode. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "Did he tell you what's inside?" he asked Tyler. "No, sir," Tyler replied. "He just said it was something that belonged to you and Mom together from a long time ago. He said it might make you remember why you used to be proud of her." The room felt like it was holding its breath. Jake had stopped smiling. Maya had tears in her eyes. Mom was gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles were white. My aunts and uncles and cousins were all watching this unfold like it was a movie, but I barely noticed them anymore. All I could see was my father holding that small box, and my son standing there like a young warrior who'd just delivered the most important message of his life. "Tyler," I started to say, wanting to spare everyone from whatever was about to happen, but Dad held up his hand. "No," he said quietly. "Let me open it." His fingers fumbled with the wrapping paper, and I noticed they were trembling slightly. Whatever Nate had put in that box, whatever message he'd crafted for this moment, was about to change everything. I just had no idea how much. Dad lifted the lid of the small box, looked inside, and his entire face crumpled. The change was so sudden and dramatic that several people gasped. Then the tears started falling, and I realized I was about to discover something that would rewrite the story of my relationship with my father forever. Dad's hands were shaking as he reached into the small box and pulled out a faded photograph. Even from across the room, I could see it was old, the edges worn soft from handling. He held it up to the light, and his face went completely white before the tears started falling in earnest. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Oh, Riley." He turned the photo toward me and my world tilted. It was a picture of the two of us at a father-daughter dance when I was 8 years old. I was wearing a pink dress with puffy sleeves that Mom had sewn for me, and Dad was in his best suit, both of us grinning at the camera like we'd just won the lottery. I remembered that night like it was yesterday, how special I'd felt dancing with my dad, how he'd told everyone at the dance that I was his brilliant little girl, who'd just gotten straight A's on her report card. But what made my breath catch was seeing that photo again after so many years. I'd carried it in my wallet through high school, through college, through my early years with Nate. It had been my proof that my father had loved me once, that I hadn't imagined those moments when I felt like I mattered to him. Dad pulled out a folded piece of paper from the box, and I recognized Nate's handwriting immediately. His voice was barely a whisper as he read it aloud. "This was in Riley's wallet when we got married 15 years ago. She carried it everywhere, even after you stopped making her feel like the little girl in this picture. She kept it through every argument, every disappointment, every time you made her feel like she wasn't enough. She was hoping that someday you'd remember the dad who was proud of her that night, who told her she could be anything she wanted to be. She deserves better than your conditions, Frank. She always has. Love doesn't come with a performance review. Nate." The silence in the room was absolute. Dad was staring at the photo like he was seeing a ghost, tears streaming down his cheeks. I felt my own tears starting, remembering how I'd finally taken that photo out of my wallet 2 years ago when Nate and I were separating. I'd been cleaning out my purse and found it there, faded and creased, and I'd finally accepted that the father in that picture was gone. Except Nate had kept it. Somehow, he'd saved it without telling me. "I practiced dancing for weeks," I said, my voice barely audible. The words came out before I could stop them. "I wanted to be perfect for you that night. You were so proud of my report card, and when we danced, you told me I was going to change the world someday." Dad looked up at me, his eyes red and devastated. "You were so smart," he said, his voice thick with tears. "So creative and curious and full of ideas. You asked the best questions. You saw things differently than everyone else." "Then what happened?" The question came out sharper than I intended, but I needed to know. "When did I stop being enough for you?" He was quiet for a long moment, still holding the photograph. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "When you chose English over engineering. When you wanted to write instead of build. When you picked Nate because you loved him instead of because he could provide security." He looked directly at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before: regret. "I forgot that the little girl in this picture was brave enough to follow her heart. I punished you for being exactly who I raised you to be." The room felt like it was spinning. Jake was staring at Dad like he'd never seen him before. Maya was crying openly. Mom had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "I was hardest on you because you reminded me of myself," Dad continued, his voice stronger now. "Creative, sensitive, different from what everyone expected. But I was a coward. I chose the safe path, the practical path, and I convinced myself it was the only right way. When you chose differently, when you chose to be brave, it reminded me of everything I'd given up. So I made you pay for my regrets." Tyler was still standing beside his grandfather, watching this unfold with wide eyes. Dad looked down at him and said, "Your mother is the bravest person I know, and I've spent 20 years trying to make her ashamed of that." He stood up slowly, still holding the photograph, and walked toward me. "Riley, I forgot. I forgot how proud I used to be of you before I decided you weren't enough. But you were always enough. You were always more than enough." Dad pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home after being lost for 20 years. His arms around me were strong and warm, and I could feel his tears on my shoulder as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Riley. I'm so sorry for all of it." I melted into that embrace, feeling like that 8-year-old girl in the pink dress who believed her daddy thought she hung the moon. When we finally pulled apart, the entire room was transformed. The tension that had defined our family gatherings for decades was gone, replaced by something raw and honest and real. Mom was sobbing now, and she stood up from her chair with shaking legs. "I should have said something," she said, her voice thick with years of suppressed guilt. "I should have defended you, Riley. I watched him tear you down year after year, and I stayed silent because I was afraid of conflict. I failed you as a mother." I reached out and took her hand. "Mom, you were trying to keep the peace. I understand." "No," she said firmly. "Peace isn't worth your daughter's self-worth. I should have fought for you." Jake approached us then, his usual confidence replaced by something vulnerable. "Riley, I owe you an apology too. That comment about legacy and regrets, all the years I let Dad put you down while I basked in his approval, it was cruel. I knew better, and I did nothing." "We all played our roles," I said, feeling lighter than I had in years. "The golden child, the disappointment, the peacekeeper. But maybe we can write a different story now." Maya wrapped her arms around both Jake and me. "I always admired how you stayed true to yourself," she told me. "Even when it cost you Dad's approval. I was too scared to risk that." Tyler had been watching all of this with fascination, and Dad knelt down to his eye level. "Your mother raised an incredible young man," he told Tyler. "And your father, he did something today that took real courage. He protected someone he loved even after their marriage ended. That's what good men do." Tyler nodded solemnly. "Dad said you might have forgotten how to love Mom the right way, but that didn't mean you didn't love her at all." The wisdom in those words, coming from my 12-year-old son, left us all speechless for a moment. As the evening wound down and extended family began to leave, Dad pulled me aside. "I want to make up for lost time," he said. "I want to hear about your work, your dreams, what makes you happy. I want to know the woman you became despite my failures as a father." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. Over the following months, everything changed. Dad started calling me regularly, asking about my projects at work and Tyler's baseball games. He read my old college essays and told me my writing was beautiful. He framed that faded photograph and put it on his desk, telling anyone who'd listen about his brilliant daughter who'd chosen courage over convenience. Mom found her voice too, becoming the fierce advocate she should have been all along. Jake and I developed a real relationship, built on mutual respect instead of competition. Maya and I grew closer, sharing the creative bond that Dad had always dismissed. But perhaps the most important change was in Tyler. Watching his mother finally receive the love and respect she deserved taught him something invaluable about standing up for people you care about, even when it's difficult. The photo that Nate had saved became a symbol of second chances and the power of never giving up on someone you love. It reminded us all that sometimes the people who truly see our worth have to speak up when we can't speak for ourselves, and that it's never too late to rebuild a relationship on love instead of conditions. 6 months later, at my 43rd birthday, Dad stood up to make a toast. "To my daughter Riley," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that being different isn't a flaw to fix, it's a gift to celebrate. I'm proud of the woman you are, the mother you've become, and the courage you've always had." That night, Tyler whispered to me as I tucked him into bed, "I'm glad Grandpa remembered how to love you right." Sometimes the most powerful gifts come in the smallest packages, and sometimes it takes a child to remind adults what unconditional love really means. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about a time when someone stood up for you, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about family, forgiveness, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds.